She was standing at the door with her bag in her hand. Again, this is how part 5 begins. Not with a wedding, not with a warm kitchen and jollof rice and a child's drawing on a coffee table. With Amara Diallo standing at the door of the Kang penthouse in the early morning with her bag packed and her jaw set, and the specific expression of a woman who has decided that the right thing and the easy thing are not always the same thing, and she is choosing the right one even though it is costing her everything she has found in this building. She is not being forced out this time. Nobody filed a report. Nobody sent men in black suits to pull her clothes from hangers. Nobody slid a termination letter under her door. She is leaving because she chose to. And that is the part of this story that nobody saw coming. Go back with me. Go back 3 months before this moment. Back to when the household was warm and the drawing was on the coffee table and Jin-ho had said, "We will be brave together, slowly, in the right amount," and she had said yes. Go back to when that yes felt like the truest thing she had said in 8 months in this city. Go back to when it felt like enough. Welcome to Seoul of Africa, where African hearts and Korean souls meet in the most emotional love stories ever told. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. We have so many more stories waiting for you, and every single one of them hits deeper than the last. Because here is what nobody tells you about choosing to stay in a place that was not built for you. The choosing does not end on the day you say yes. It begins there, and every day after that is its own choosing. Its own set of reasons, its own set of costs, and some mornings the cost is manageable and some mornings it is not. And on the morning that part 5 is really about, the morning that built toward this door and this bag, the cost was not manageable. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back properly. Let me take you back to the 3 months between the hallway and the door, because those 3 months are the part of this story that the earlier parts did not have room for. The part where love is not a moment but a practice, where belonging is not a feeling but a decision made over and over and over again in the small hours of ordinary days. Let me take you back to where it got hard. Fade to black, then slow fade in. A morning, 6 weeks after the hallway. The problem was not Jin-ho. That is the first thing that needs to be said clearly and without softening. The problem was not that he changed his mind or retreated behind the wall or decided that slowly and in the right amount was more slowly than he had intended. He had meant every word of what he said in the hallway. He had been as consistent in the weeks that followed as a man who has spent 42 years being consistent in everything is capable of being. He showed up in the kitchen for breakfast. He said good morning to Amara the way he said good morning to people he respected, directly, without performance, with eye contact. He asked about her reading. He remembered things she had mentioned. He was, in the careful, deliberate way of someone who has not done this in a very long time and is relearning the language of it, trying. The problem was the household. Specifically, the problem was the people in it who had not been asked. It started with the junior staff. Not all of them. 2 of them, a woman named Park Hye-jin, who had been with the household for 9 years and who had her own clear understanding of the order of things, and a man named Yoon Seung-ho, who was 26 and new and had formed his opinions from Park Hye-jin's before he had formed any of his own. They were not cruel. They were not explicit. What they were was consistent in the specific low-level way that makes something feel like weather. Always present, never acknowledged, impossible to point to directly. Amara noticed it on a Tuesday. The kitchen was being set for breakfast and she reached for the good coffee cups, the ones that had been used every morning for the past 6 weeks without comment, and Park Hye-jin reached past her and moved them back to the upper cabinet. Not aggressively, just efficiently, with the specific neutrality of someone performing a correction. Amara looked at her. Park Hye-jin looked back. Her expression communicated nothing. Amara used the ordinary cups and said nothing. But it happened again. And then again in a different register. A question directed to Mrs. Cho rather than to Amara when Amara was closer and clearly available. A door held open for the wrong amount of time. The specific performance of someone present who has decided not to see you. Small things. The kind of things that are easy to dismiss individually and impossible to dismiss collectively because collectively they communicate a single clear message. You are tolerated but not accepted. You are here on a conditional basis, and the conditions are not clear and they are not up to you. Amara said nothing to Jin-ho. She told herself it was because she did not want to become a management problem in a household that had enough of those. She told herself she was handling it. She told herself it would settle. She was partly right. It did settle, just not in the direction she needed it to. Quick cut. 5 weeks after the hallway. Evening. The conversation that broke something happened in the kitchen after dinner. Amara was cleaning up, alone, the rest of the staff having finished their evening duties. And she was humming the lullaby, the Yoruba one her father had taught her, because the kitchen at night had become the one space in the building that felt fully hers, and the humming was the sound of a person who feels safe enough to make sound without thinking about it. She did not hear Park Hye-jin come in behind her. She heard only the last thing Park Hye-jin said before she walked back out. Spoken not to Amara, spoken to the empty room in a voice that assumed it was empty. The specific carelessness of someone who has stopped remembering they need to be careful. 5 words, said flatly, without venom, which was almost worse than venom because venom would have been personal. This was impersonal. This was institutional. This was the voice of someone stating a thing they considered obvious. She said, "This is not her house." And then she left. Amara stood at the kitchen sink. The lullaby had stopped. The water was running and she turned it off. She stood there in the quiet of the kitchen that had, 60 seconds ago, felt fully hers. She was quiet for a long time. Then she went to her room and she sat on the edge of her bed and she thought. She thought about the words and she thought about the 9 years. And she thought about the specific quality of a prejudice that is not about race alone but about class and position and a hierarchy of belonging that had been established long before she arrived and that her presence disrupted in ways that had nothing to do with her character and everything to do with her category. She thought about her mother. About Park Yeonji leaving Seoul in 1989 with a man her family would not accept. About the family register, about what it cost to stay in a place that had decided on your category. She thought about Sora, about the drawing, about the day we found each other in careful child's handwriting. She thought about what it means to belong to something, and whether belonging has to be unanimously granted to be real, and whether one person in a household saying this is not her house had the power to make it true. She sat with all of that for a very long time. And then, and this is the part that matters, she went and knocked on Mrs. Cho's door. Slow zoom on the hallway outside Mrs. Cho's room. The knock, a pause, then the door opening. Mrs. Cho stood in the doorway in her nightgown, the first time Amara had ever seen her out of uniform, and she looked at Amara and her expression said she already knew something had happened. She had the expression of a woman who knew everything that happened in her household the moment it happened and who had been waiting for this knock with the specific resignation of someone waiting for a bill they know is overdue. Amara said, "Can I come in?" Mrs. Cho stepped back. Amara came in. She sat in the one chair beside the small desk and Mrs. Cho sat on the edge of her bed and they looked at each other in the honest, unguarded light of two people who have stopped performing for the evening. Amara said, "I heard what Park Hye-jin said." Mrs. Cho said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "I want to know," Amara said, "if she is saying it alone, or if she is saying what other people in this household are thinking and not saying." Mrs. Cho was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that has texture. Then she said, "She is saying what some people feel. Not all people, not me, not anymore." She paused. "But some." "Because I am not Korean," Amara said. "Because you are not what was expected," Mrs. Cho said. She said it carefully, precisely, not as a judgment but as a report. "This household has a structure that has existed for 15 years. You arrived and the structure changed. For some people, and the change is welcome. For others, it is not." Another pause. "And there are people here who love Mr. Kang and Sora very much and who are afraid. Not of you, afraid of what it means if this does not work, afraid of more loss in a house that has already had more than it should." Amara looked at her for a long moment. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Mrs. Cho considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she said, "I was. When you first arrived, when Sora chose you, I was very afraid. I thought, this woman has walked into something she does not understand, and she will leave, and she will take a piece of Sora with her when she goes, and this house cannot afford another piece taken from it. And now? Amara said. Mrs. Cho looked at her, this woman who had delivered the termination letter, who had communicated disapproval in 3 seconds with a single look, who had been built from 15 years of loyalty to a household she had watched grieve itself nearly to silence. She said, "Now I think that you understand it better than anyone who has ever lived in this building except the woman in the portrait." She paused, and I think that is what frightened me most. Because understanding it the way you do means you will not leave easily, and that means you will stay. And staying means this is real. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs. And real things can be lost. And this house has lost enough real things. The room was very quiet. Amara looked at the woman on the edge of the bed. This small, formal, entirely complicated person who had been the first obstacle and was becoming, in this nightgown, in this small room at this honest hour, something harder to categorize. She said, "What do I do about Park Hee-jin?" Mrs. Cho said, "Nothing. I will handle Park Hee-jin." And her voice when she said it left no room for interpretation. Amara looked at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Mrs. Cho said. "I am choosing to. There is a difference." She paused. "Go to bed. We will talk more in the morning." And she stopped, started again. "The cups in the upper cabinet. The good ones. They were always intended to be the ones used at breakfast." "I should have said so earlier." Amara stood. She moved to the door. Then she stopped. She turned around and she looked at Mrs. Cho sitting on the edge of her bed in her nightgown and she said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." Mrs. Cho nodded. Once, the small decisive nod that meant accepted. Amara left, and in the quiet of her room, Mrs. Cho sat for a few minutes, and she looked at the wall, and she thought about 15 years, and she thought about a woman in a portrait whose warmth had made this household what it was, and she thought about a Nigerian-Korean woman who hummed a lullaby in the kitchen at night and made food that tasted like 2 worlds at once, and held a child's stuffed bear with both hands, and stayed when she did not have to. She thought, Soo-yeon would have chosen her too. She turned off the light. Quick cut. 2 weeks after that, the morning, Park Hye-jin left the household voluntarily on a Wednesday. Mrs. Cho reported it to Jin-ho as a resignation, which was technically accurate. The details of what Mrs. Cho had said to her in the private conversation that preceded it were not reported and were not asked about. Some things are handled between women in households and are not required to pass through the official record. Yoon Sung-ho, without his reference point, recalibrated. The household breathed differently after that. Not all the way, but enough. Enough is how most things get better. Not all at once. In enough increments until the total is something you can live inside. Slow zoom on the kitchen. The good cups on the counter. Ready for breakfast. Exactly where they are supposed to be. Fade to black. But here is the thing about enough. Enough does not mean finished. Enough means the immediate pressure has lifted. The deeper thing, the thing that Amara had been sitting with since the kitchen and Mrs. Cho's room and the words, "This is not her house." The deeper thing was still there. Quiet now, but there. And it surfaced on a specific night. 4 weeks after the cups were returned to the counter. In a way that neither Jin-ho nor Amara planned and that came from the most unexpected direction. It came from outside the household entirely. Jin-ho had a meeting. A formal one. The kind that required a restaurant and a particular quality of suit and the management of an impression. The person he was meeting was Counselor Park Jun-seo, 61 years old Seoul family money, the kind of man who has sat on enough boards and committees to believe his opinions are policy. The meeting was about a business arrangement in Jin-ho's legitimate pharmaceutical distribution network. Standard, manageable. What was not standard was the moment at the end of the dinner when the business was concluded and the wine was poured, and Counselor Park, in the comfortable warmth of a meal he had enjoyed, said something that was not said in malice. Malice is never as dangerous as this, but was said in the specific casual confidence of a man who believes his worldview is shared by every person of standing in the room. He said, "I hear you have a woman in your household. A mixed blood woman, African-Korean." He said it the way you mention weather, a known fact, a neutral observation. "I hope you are being appropriately careful with that particular arrangement. For Sora's sake, these things have a way of becoming complicated when they involve," he paused, chose his next word with the precision of a man who considers himself diplomatic. "Cultural distance." Jinho looked at him. The look lasted long enough to become its own conversation. Then Jinho set his wineglass down with a care that was more controlled than the moment required, which was itself a signal to anyone paying attention, and he said, very quietly, the way he said everything that mattered, "Amara Diallo is my late wife's niece. She came to Seoul looking for family. She found it. The arrangement you are describing is called a family, and I would encourage you to be appropriately careful with how you discuss mine." He picked up the wineglass again. He finished the business. He stood when the evening was concluded, shook the counselor's hand with the professional warmth that cost him nothing, and he left. He did not tell Amara what was said. He did not tell her about the wineglass set down with excessive care or the specific temperature of his voice in the 2 sentences that followed. He did not tell her because she had already been carrying the weight of Park Hye-jin's 5 words, and he was not willing to add to that weight with evidence from outside the building. What he did instead was come home that evening and find her in the living room reading, and he sat down across from her, not beside her, across the way you sit when you want to look directly at someone. And he said, "Are you happy here?" Amara looked up from the book. She looked at his face. She read it the way she had learned to read it over months of proximity, past the surface into the specific quality of the silence that preceded the question. She said, "What happened?" He said, "Someone said something tonight that was not worth repeating, and it made me ask myself whether I had done enough, whether I am doing enough, to make this building feel like what it is supposed to feel like for you." He paused. "So I am asking, directly, are you happy here?" She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man who had sat across from Director Shin without raising his voice, who had placed his hand over hers in a hallway and said brave together, slowly, who had come home from a dinner and sat across from her and asked the question that cost him the most to ask because the honest answer might cost him something he was not prepared to lose. She said, "Mostly." He said, "Tell me the part that is not mostly." She looked at the book in her lap. She looked at the room, the warm room, the lived-in room, the room with Sora's drawing somewhere nearby, and the good cups on the counter, and Mrs. Cho's small, decisive nod still settling into the meaning of things. She looked at all of that. Then she said, "I'm afraid of being a complication. I have been afraid of that from the first day I walked through the door of this building. I have been afraid that the more I become, the more I am to Sora, the more I am to you, the more there is to lose. And I have lost things before. I have lost my mother. I have lost my father. I have spent 8 months in a city looking for a door that was already closed, and I found this. I found more than the door. I found everything behind it." She stopped. "And I am afraid that is exactly the kind of thing that gets taken away." Jinho looked at her. He was quiet for a long time. The room held them both. Then he said, "I need to tell you something about the counselor." And he told her, not all of it, not the specific words because some things do not need to be repeated to be addressed, but enough. The fact of it, the way he had responded, the wineglass, the 2 sentences. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet. Then she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. And the echo of Mrs. Cho's words in her own voice was not lost on either of them. "There is a difference. I chose to." He looked at her steadily. "There will be more counselors. There will always be more counselors. There will be people inside this building and outside of it who will have opinions about what you are and what you are doing here and whether you belong. I cannot make them stop having those opinions." He paused. "What I can do is make sure that everyone who matters in this building and outside of it is completely clear about where I stand. And I want to be clear with you right now, in case I have not been clear enough. You are not a complication. You are not an arrangement. You are not a maid who became a situation. You are—" He stopped. He looked at his hands briefly, the gesture of a man reaching for language he is still learning. "You are the person my daughter chose. You are the daughter of my wife's sister. You are the woman who stood in my hallway and said brave together and meant it. And you are the woman I would very much like to stop being afraid of losing, if that is something you can also say yes to." The room was very quiet. Amara looked at him. She looked at the sharp, angular face that had been so closed when she arrived and was open now. Not all the way, not the dramatic openness of a man transformed, but the honest openness of a man who has done the work, slowly, in the right amount, and is offering the result. She said, "Are you asking me something?" He said, "I am working my way toward asking you something. I am not there yet, but I wanted you to know which direction I'm working." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I can say yes to that." And something in the room exhaled, something that had been held for a long time. The specific exhale of two people who have been careful for so long that the carefulness has become its own weight and have just agreed, together explicitly in the same direction, to start putting some of it down. Slow zoom on the room. The warm light, the two people across from each other. The book face down on the sofa. The distance between them that is not distance anymore, but the comfortable space of two people who know each other well enough to sit across a room and feel close. Fade to black. Now go back to the door. Go back to Amara standing in the early morning with her bag packed. This is not what it looks like. Amara was not leaving the household. She was leaving the small staff bedroom at the back of the penthouse, the room with the window that faced the adjacent building rather than the city, the room that the architecture had designated as sufficient for the people who kept things running, and she was carrying her bag to the other end of the building. Jin-ho had asked her 2 days earlier whether she would consider moving to the guest suite, the one with the window that faced Seoul, the one that was on the family side of the building rather than the staff side. He had asked her in the specific, careful way he asked things that mattered to him, directly, without preamble, with the understanding that she was allowed to say no and that he would accept it if she did. She had not said no. She had said, "Give me 2 days." She had needed 2 days because moving from the staff corridor to the family corridor was not a practical decision. It was a statement, a public one. It was the building itself declaring something that could not be undeclared. And she had needed 2 days to sit inside that declaration and make sure she meant it before she made it. She meant it. She picked up her bag on a Tuesday morning and she walked the full length of the hallway, past the portrait, Soo-yeon's face watching, as it always did. And she turned right instead of left, and she opened the door to the guest suite and she stepped inside. The window faced Seoul, the whole city blazing below. Real Seoul, not the adjacent building's glass, not the wall, not the architecture of sufficiency. The actual city, 40 floors of it, and beyond that the Han River, and beyond that the mountains in the distance on a clear morning. She set her bag on the bed. She looked at the window for a long time. Then she opened her bag, and she took out the small worn photograph in its worn frame. Her mother and Soo-yeon's face in the garden, the two sisters, the ordinary afternoon they did not know was the last. And she placed it on the windowsill. Not on the bedside table, on the windowsill where it faced the city. She thought she would have liked this view. Both of them would have. Quick cut! 2 months later. The question came on a Saturday morning. An ordinary one. No particular occasion, no particular arrangement. The kitchen was warm, and Sora was on her stool, and Amara was at the stove, and Jin-ho had appeared in the doorway with his coffee, which was by now simply a thing that happened on Saturday mornings and had stopped requiring acknowledgement because it had become normal. Sora looked at the two of them. She looked at her father in the doorway with his coffee. She looked at Amara at the stove. She looked at the bear on the counter beside her bowl. She said, "Appa, are you going to ask her?" Jin-ho looked at his daughter. Then at Amara, then at his daughter again. Amara had not moved from the stove, but the spoon she was using had stopped moving. "Ask her what?" Jin-ho said, carefully. Sora gave him the look. The specific look she had been giving adults who underestimated her intelligence since she was approximately 2 years old. "You know what?" she said. "You have been working your way toward it for 2 months. I have been watching you work toward it. It is not a mystery, Appa." Jin-ho was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known?" "Since the night you sat across from each other in the living room," she said. "And you told her you were working your way toward asking her something." She looked at him very steadily. "That was 2 months ago. I think the working toward has been sufficient." Amara, at the stove, pressed her lips together. The spoon was definitely not moving now. Jin-ho looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he said, "You are 8 years old." "I am 7 3/4, Sora said. And I have been right about everything from the beginning. You are welcome to check. The kitchen was very quiet. Then Jin-ho put his coffee cup down on the counter, very deliberately, the way he put things down when he had made a decision, and he walked across the kitchen and he stood beside Amara at the stove. She turned to look at him. He looked at her. He said, I was going to do this differently. I had a plan. There was a restaurant involved and a specific conversation that I had been working your way toward, Amara said. Yes. He looked at his daughter, who was watching with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a very specific scene to play out and is pleased it is finally happening. He looked back at Amara. My daughter has informed me that the working toward has been sufficient. Amara looked at him. The full warmth of her face, the dark honey skin, the wide almond eyes, the full lips, all of her mixed heritage and all of her 8 months and all of her 36 years of a family story finally arriving in this kitchen, entirely visible, entirely present, entirely unguarded. She said, she is usually right. She is always right, he said. And then, without the restaurant, without the plan, in his kitchen on a Saturday morning with a 7 3/4-year-old child watching from a counter stool and a worn brown bear facing outward, he asked her. He asked her simply, directly, in the way he did everything that mattered, without ornamentation, without performance, just the true thing stated plainly and offered openly and left entirely in her hands. Amara looked at him. She looked at Sora. She looked at the city through the window, her window now, the one that faced Seoul. She said yes. Sora on her stool nodded once. The small, decisive nod, the one that meant accepted. Correct, I knew. Then she picked up her bear and she held him out toward the center of the kitchen and she said, with the specific gravity of a child officiating a ceremony in her own jurisdiction, Bear says yes also. And Amara laughed, the real laugh, the sudden one. The one that cannot be planned or performed, the one that arrives from somewhere below the management of the day and surprises even the person producing it. And Jin-ho, who had heard that laugh in his kitchen and his hallway and his ordinary days for months now, who had organized his mornings around the possibility of hearing it, looked at his daughter and her bear and the woman in his kitchen who was going to be his wife, and he did the thing he had learned to do again slowly and in the right amount. He smiled. Slow zoom on the kitchen. The three of them. The bear, the city in the window, the morning continuing around them, ordinary and miraculous in equal measure. Fade to black. The wedding was small. That was the only word for it. Small, and deliberately so. Jin-ho had offered something larger. He had offered a restaurant and a guest list and the appropriate ceremony of a man in his position marking an occasion. Amara had listened to the offer and she had said, I would like something that fits inside this building. I would like the people who live here and the people who love us and the city through the window, and that to be enough. He said, it is more than enough. So it was in the penthouse. The living room cleared and arranged. The windows open so Seoul could be part of it, the city that had never cared what happened 40 floors above it, and that was present anyway, humming in the background the way it always did, the indifferent witness to everything this household had survived and become. Uncle Tae-sung stood at the front of the room. He had been asked to say a few words, and he had prepared what he intended to be a brief and dignified address. He spoke for 4 minutes and cried for 2 of them which he did not acknowledge and nobody mentioned, and which was, for the people who loved him, entirely sufficient and entirely him. Mrs. Cho wore a dress, not her uniform. A real dress, dark green, quietly elegant, chosen with more care than she would ever acknowledge. She sat in the front row and she held her hands in her lap, and she looked at Amara standing in the light from the Seoul windows, and she thought about 15 years, and she thought about Soo-yeon, and she thought about how the truest things find their way, regardless of how many doors you close in front of them. She did not cry, but she pressed her lips together for a long moment, and the woman sitting beside her, one of the junior staff who had been with the household for 3 years, reached over and put her hand on top of Mrs. Cho's hand without saying anything. Mrs. Cho looked at the hand. Then she turned her palm over and she held it. Chae-rin was not in the room. She had not been invited and had not expected to be. But there was a card, delivered that morning in her precise handwriting, left with the doorman. It said 3 sentences. It said, "I heard about the wedding. I am glad. I hope she knows how rare it is to be the person a child walks across a room for, and I hope you know it too." It was not signed with her name. It was signed with the initials BC, and that was enough. Some apologies do not require a presence. They require only the evidence that the person making them has understood what they are apologizing for. Sora was the one who walked Amara across the room. This had been Sora's idea. She had proposed it on a Tuesday evening with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and is simply now announcing the conclusion. She said, "I want to walk with her because I was the one who started this. So it is right that I am the one who finishes it." Nobody argued with that. Nobody was capable of arguing with that. So Sora walked beside Amara across the living room in her best dress, the dark blue one with the white collar that her mother had chosen for her birthday the last year she was alive. And she held Amara's hand with both of her own, and she walked very slowly and very deliberately, the way she did everything that she had decided mattered, and the room watched her do it, and several people who had been managing their composure stopped managing it. At the front of the room, Jinho watched his daughter walk his future wife across the space that had been cold and formal and silent for 2 years and was none of those things now. He watched Sora's face, the serious, luminous, absolutely certain face of a child who has been right from the beginning and is not surprised to find herself here, but is glad, deeply glad, in the specific warm way of a person receiving exactly what they chose. He watched that face and he felt something complete itself in him, something that had been interrupted 26 months ago on a Tuesday morning and had been trying to find its way back to completion ever since. It had taken a lullaby through a cracked door, a stuffed bear held with both hands, a dining room walk past 5 women, a marble floor, a secret in a folder, a jollof rice recipe from Lagos, a hand placed over a hand in a hallway. It had taken everything it took. Amara reached the front of the room. She looked at Jinho. He looked at her. Sora stood between them, and she looked at both of them, and she was satisfied with what she saw, and she took a small step to the side to let them face each other. Taesung, red-eyed and composed, began to speak. The city hummed below. The portrait hung in the hallway. Suyan's face looking out at a hallway that had never been quieter because everyone was in the other room. The worn brown bear sat on the front row beside Sora's empty chair, facing forward, because Sora had placed him there before she walked across the room so he could see. Of course he could see. He had been watching from the beginning. Slow zoom on the bear on the chair, the faded ribbon, the worn fabric, the small, dignified presence that had witnessed everything, the nights on the floor, the dinners, the goodbye letters, the hallway, the kitchen, all of it, facing forward with the patience of something that has always known it was in the right story. Fade to black. Hold it. Then the slowest possible fade in. 1 year later, the penthouse sounds different. That is the first thing. The sound of it. Marble and silence were the architecture of it for 2 years, and now the marble is still there and the silence is gone, replaced by the specific acoustic of a home that is inhabited rather than occupied. Shoes near the door. Music from somewhere in the apartment. Low, unidentifiable, the kind of music that is on because someone turned it on and not because it was chosen. A television from Sora's room that she is technically not supposed to watch on a school night and is watching anyway. The sound of the kitchen being used, the particular percussion of a meal being prepared, pots and water, and the low, warm sound of someone humming. The lullaby, always the lullaby. Somewhere in the apartment, Amara is humming her father's melody, and the sound of it has become so much a part of the building that on the 3 evenings a week when she is not here, when she is at the Korean language class she started in September, she is committed to finally learning her mother's language properly. The hallway feels the absence of it. Jinho is in his study. He is working. He is always working. That has not changed and was never going to change. He is a man whose industry is in his blood in ways that a wedding does not rewire. But the study lamp is off. He has the curtains open and the city light is enough and the door to the study is open, which it never used to be. The open door is the change. The open door means the building is not divided into his part and everyone else's part anymore. The open door means, come in if you need me. The open door means this is a home. On the wall in the hallway, the family portrait is still there. It has not been moved. It will not be moved. Suyan's face looks out at the hallway, and the hallway has changed around her. Warmer, noisier, more human. And she looks out at all of it with the warm eyes that always saw things before the people around her did. Beside the portrait, something new. A photograph, framed in the same dark wood as the portrait, hung at the same eye level. 3 people, Jin-ho in a simple dark suit, Amara in white and gold, Sora between them in the dark blue dress with the white collar. Sora is holding the bear. All 3 of them are looking at the camera, and the expressions on all 3 faces are the specific expressions of people who have arrived somewhere they worked to reach and know it and are not pretending otherwise. Under the photograph, in a small frame of its own, Sora's drawing, the one from the coffee table. The 3 figures at the base of the portrait, the hand on the hand, the handwriting at the bottom, mounted and framed, hung on the wall of the hallway like the document it is. The day we found each other. Slow zoom on the drawing, on the handwriting, on the 3 figures. Then footsteps, small ones, familiar rhythm. 2 quick, 1 slow, the specific beat of a child who has somewhere to be and is going there at her own pace. Sora appears in the hallway in her pajamas with the bear under one arm. She stops in front of the photographs. She looks at the portrait. She looks at the new photograph. She looks at her drawing in its frame. She nods once, the small, decisive nod. Then she looks up at the portrait specifically, at Suyan's face, and she says, in the quiet of the hallway, the thing she has been saying quietly in this hallway on certain evenings for as long as she has been old enough to say it. "Good night, Iyama." She stands there for a moment. The hallway is quiet. Then from somewhere in the apartment, the lullaby. Amara humming. The Yoruba melody, low and warm. The sound that has been traveling from Lagos to Seoul and back again inside the women of this family for longer than any of them knew. Sora hears it. Her face, already settled, settles further. She turns from the portrait and she walks toward the sound. She has always walked toward the sound. From the study, Jin-ho hears his daughter's footsteps moving down the hallway. He hears the lullaby. He leans back in his chair and he looks at the open door, and through it the warm light of the hallway, and in that hallway his daughter's small shadow moving toward the kitchen. He does not get up. He does not need to. He can hear from here. And what he can hear, the lullaby, the footsteps, the television from Sora's room still going, the specific living warmth of a household that has people in it who are happy to be in it, is sufficient. More than sufficient. It is everything. He thinks about a Tuesday morning 28 months ago, and the phone call, and the white room, and the words he has spent every day since trying to unhear. He thinks about what grief does to a household when it is not given language or permission or outlet, how it becomes weather, how it becomes architecture, how it becomes the specific sound of silence that 2 people who love each other cannot fill because they are too busy surviving it to talk about it. He thinks about a lullaby heard through a cracked door. He thinks about a child who walked across a dining room. He thinks about his wife. He thinks about what she would say if she could see the hallway right now. The portrait and the photograph and the drawing all hung together. The 3 figures at the base of the portrait with the hand on the hand. He thinks she would say exactly what Tae-sung said she would say. That some things find their way home, regardless of how many doors you close in front of them. He thinks she was right about that. She was right about everything. He turns back to his work. The open door lets in the lullaby. He lets it. Slow zoom on the hallway from the study doorway. The portrait, the photograph, the drawing, the warm light, the lullaby from the kitchen. Then from the kitchen, the lullaby stops, not because something is wrong, because Sora has reached it and climbed onto her stool and said something that made Amara laugh, the real laugh. The sudden one, the one that has been in this building for 1 year now and that has changed the sound of it in ways that no renovation could have achieved. The laughter fills the hallway. It goes past the portrait. It goes past the photograph. It goes past the drawing with its careful handwriting. It goes to the open study door and through it, and it reaches the man at the desk who is pretending to work and who is not pretending very hard. He sets his pen down. He gets up. He walks to the kitchen. And the story, the whole long, honest, beautiful, difficult story of a mafia boss and a maid and a little girl who was right about everything from the beginning, it does not end here. Because the best stories do not end. They simply arrive at the place they were always trying to reach. They find the room they were looking for. They settle, and this one has settled, in a penthouse in Seoul, in a kitchen in the evening, in a hallway with 3 frames on the wall, in the sound of a lullaby that traveled from Lagos and a child's laugh that has been waiting 2 years to be this free, and a man walking toward both of them because he learned slowly and in the right amount that the bravest thing he ever did was not anything that happened in a boardroom or a back alley. It was opening a door. It was walking toward the sound. It was listening to his daughter. She was right after all. She was always right. She walked across a dining room 6 weeks into a grief that was bigger than she was, and she took the hand of a woman who was already hers, and she said 3 words that rearranged everything. I choose her, and she was right. She is always right. Slow zoom on the kitchen doorway. Jin-ho pausing in it, looking at the 2 of them. His daughter on her stool, Amara at the stove, the laughter just finished, the warmth still in the room, the bear on the counter facing out. He stands there for a moment. Then he steps inside. The kitchen closes around all 3 of them. The city hums below. The portrait watches from the hallway. The drawing stays on the wall where Sora put it and where it will stay because it is the truest document in this building. The day we found each other. That is what Sora called it. That is what it was. That is what it will always be. Fade to black. This is the end of the story. Thank you for staying. Thank you for all 5 parts. Thank you for caring about a little girl with a stuffed bear who walked across a room and changed everything. Thank you for caring about a Nigerian-Korean woman who came to Seoul looking for a door and found a family. Thank you for caring about a man who learned slowly and in the right amount to open his. This story is done, but this channel is not. There are more stories, more worlds, more people who deserve to be seen in the way that Amara was seen. First by a child, and then by everyone the child convinced. Subscribe if you have not. You are already part of this. You have been since part 1. And whatever comes next, we will find it together, just like they did.